Hey guys, it's Christina of CraftyPaws. I'm here to share a process video on how I made my first little slider card. Isn't that adorable? This is my entry into Barbara Alexander's 300 plus superstar subscriber challenge. She's celebrating surpassing 300 subbies, and she's actually just 26 away from getting to 400. Yay, Barbara! If you guys don't know Barbara Alexander yet, please go check her out. And if you're a new subscriber to her, please tell her that CraftyPaws sent you. She is such a sweetheart. She is super generous with her crafts, with sharing her crafting ideas and goodies and tips, and you'll just love her. She is an absolute doll. Now, I decided I was going to make this slider card because I got this adorable clearly besotted stamp set from my friend Dorothy Jewell. Thank you again, Dorothy. And this little bunny I thought would be perfect to fly across the sky in this city scene that I was able to make with this Paper Smooches Wise Dies die that's called Super 2. And it goes with a superhero stamp set that Paper Smooches has, but I really wanted to use these cute little critters. So I used that little bunny. I colored him up with my Copic markers, and then I just hand cut out this little slit so that he could slide up and down. And I'm going to share with you guys the whole process from start to finish of how I made this penny slider card without any pennies and without any special tools or dies. So I used the Paper Smooches Super 2 die to create a cityscape, and the superhero that I chose from the clearly besotted Caked Cuties was the little bunny. And so what I did with the die was I die cut out a whole bunch of these buildings, and then I'm also using the negative of where I cut out these dies so that there you see there's a whole silhouetted background, and I can layer on the die cut buildings. For the card front, I decided I'm going to have kind of a dusk scene, so I'm using Tim Holtz Distress inks in Mustard Seed, Salty Ocean, and Black Soot. I'm doing the first third in that mustard seed color, the second third in the Salty Ocean, and I'm trying to blend in, but I'm not too worried about it being super smooth because I'm going to be going over much of it with Black Soot as well as covering up most of the yellow with the die cut buildings. Now here I'm using my blender tool to get on that Black Soot, and I'm liking how it's mixing pretty well, it's blending pretty well with the blue, but I'm not liking how kind of washed out it looks, and that's pretty typical of distress inks. I tend to have a heavier hand when I'm using blending tools to blend out inks, and you'll see that I end up going over a lot of this with the Black Soot. I'm also going back in with the Salty Ocean to bring in a more intense blue so that it's not so washed out. And I want this to blend in nicely with the mustard seed so that there's almost like a greenish tone between where the blue and the yellow meet. Now I'm testing out the positioning of that silhouetted skyline. That's the negative of where I die cut the buildings from, and I'm cutting off some of the peaks on these buildings because I didn't want it to look like it was a repeat, and just making those tiny little alterations makes this look more like a realistic cityscape silhouette rather than a die cut that has repeats in it. And I'm positioning it so that just a hint of the yellow is showing and it's shifting over to the green and then the blue. And I'm just cutting off the excess that is hanging off of the card front. Now to make it look like the buildings with the little windows that I die cut out are lit from inside, I'm taking some white cardstock, just a little scrap, and I'm putting some mustard seed ink on it. Now, I'm sorry I'm off screen a little bit here, but what I'm doing is I'm putting glue on one of the buildings, or grouping of buildings, and I'm gonna be gluing that onto that yellow inked cardstock behind the buildings, and then I've kind of fussy cut around the building so that you don't have the yellow kind of overhang, obviously. And now I've put wet glue on the back of that set of buildings, and I'm gluing that into place. I go through the same process with each grouping of buildings, putting wet glue on the backs, adhering it onto the yellow inked cardstock, and then fussy cutting around the buildings so that there's no yellow overhang off the edges of the buildings. And then I glue it into place. And the whole front row of the card front is all buildings that are lit up. And then behind them is that silhouette or the negative of the buildings that were die cut from that black cardstock. So it gives a sense of real depth on this card front and more like how a high density place like Manhattan might be. I repeat that process across the entire card front, and it really creates a beautiful city scene at dusk. Not that I'm going for total realism here, but I did think that in most cities, you weren't going to see every single room in a building lit up. So I went back in and picked out those tiny little window die cutouts, and I'm randomly picking different windows to fill in with those tiny squares. This might seem tedious, and I guess it is a little bit, but I think it really helps make the city scene more realistic and less kind of die cut out. Now you may not notice the kind of faded color of the black soot on this card front, but I wanted it to be a more intense nighttime scene. So I'm taking some VersaFine ink and a finger dauber, and I'm actually going in and adding another layer of inking. And I didn't want it to be a harsh transition like it's showing up there. So I went back in again with the black soot, and I'm bringing in the darker area more into the center of the card front. And I'm bringing it closer into the buildings and really the horizon. So it's looking more like a later time at dusk. And here's the finished scene. Now normally to make a slider mechanism you'd use a penny, but really the penny is too big for this tiny little superhero bunny. So I've used a 3/4 inch circle punch, and I'm layering 4 layers of cardstock to make a circle in lieu of a penny. And even the 3/4 inch circle punch is too big, so I'm just cutting off the excess that would show beyond the bunny, so that I'm getting a small little circle that I can put some power tabs on in between to make the slider mechanism. To create the space between the 2 circles, I'm using a Tombow power adhesive tab. I'm actually cutting it into quarters, and I'm going to put 2 layers of that on, and I'm using an EK powder tool to just get the adhesive off of the edges. Now I'm going to glue on the circle with the power tab on the back side of the bunny. And I know a lot of people use special dies or punches to create the slit where the bunny can be soaring up into the sky, but I am just using a metal ruler and an X-Acto knife, and I'm just cutting a slit that I think will be wide enough to fit that power tab. And I'm making sure that it's not too big because I don't want the bunny to be like flipping all around. And I'm just going to cut that slit and the ends and create a very simple slit that the bunny can go traveling up. Now, because I don't want the background or the card base, the whiteness of it, to show through that slit, I'm going to go ahead and try to match the card front dusky sky and do that on the card base. And it doesn't have to be exact, but I just want to try and match the color as best I can. And I'm gonna probably go back in a little bit more with the blue, with the blue, just so that it tries to match up with that card front. Because the slit also cut through a group of buildings, I'm just taking a Faber-Castell Pitt artist pen and I'm coloring in the silhouette of the building that was cut away. And I'm not using the actual die cut there, I'm using just a pen because I want to keep that background smooth so that it doesn't interfere with the sliding mechanism. And it's really simple because the slit is pretty narrow, and so all I'm doing is really coloring in like a black rectangle. Now I think I missed this in the videoing, but you can see I have inked the slit opening on the edges as well with a blending tool so that you don't see the white edge of where the slit was cut. And now I'm just taking 3M double-sided adhesive foam tape, and I'm putting that on either side of the slit because I want it to be, firm and secure there, but not right up to the slit because it still needs room for the circles to be able to slide up and down the slit. And I'm making sure that I have double-sided foam adhesive all along the edge of the card front because I want the card front to lie kind of flush. Now I'm just trying to kind of dry fit and make sure the bunny can slide up and down that slit, that the power tabs aren't too wide for the slit that I cut. And there I place the back circle on the other side of the power tab, and I test the sliding mechanism. Oh, and you might have noticed that I used a blending tool to ink up the edges of the card base with black soot. And I did that because I noticed that once I positioned the card front on top, because everything on the card front is popped up with this foam adhesive, you can see the edges of the card base. So I just wanted to make sure that the edges would all be dark like the card front. Lastly, I wanted to add a little sentiment in the upper left. So I'm stamping out from the Clearly Besotted stamp set to a super, and then I wanted to add friend, and I had that from a stamp set that's from a Recollections collection, but it says hello friend. So I'm putting a little bit of Scotch tape over the hello, and I'm inking it up, taking the Scotch tape off. Sorry, I'm off camera here. But I'm taking the Scotch tape off after it's been all inked, and then I'm putting just the friend part of the sentiment underneath to a super. Now I just hand cut that into a banner, and here's the finished card. I hope you've enjoyed this process video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful crafty day.